this situation wouldn't actually be that bad if not for two facts. Fact number one, you incur a cost when cutting features, just like you do when cutting running time. Except, wouldn't you know it, it's even worse. Again, I'm not speaking philosophically here. This isn't some provable rule of software development, so all you PhDs in computer science who can think of 100 counterexamples, you can just back the f up. This is just an observation about large systems. As gameplay interactions increase, a lot of the management of those interactions gets consolidated and put into systems, which makes sense. It eliminates redundancy and it makes it easier to keep track of certain things. And as those systems become more robust, more and more related features start to make use of them. If I wanted to remove survival elements, just finding a place to start would be difficult, but many diverse gameplay elements expect those survival elements to be present. And I'm not just talking about code. You could delete the code without breaking too many systems. I'm talking about game logic. If you didn't have, health, hunger, thirst, etc., creatures would attack you but would be unable to cause damage. Food would be available everywhere, but for no clear purpose, and so on. Now, don't mistake what I'm saying. I'm not arguing that you shouldn't cut stuff just because it's a pain in the ass. You got to do what you got to do. You just have to make sure that you're cutting in a way that maximizes the benefit of cutting. Just as removing whole plot elements instead of connective tissue requires less patchwork in a short film, removing whole sets of systems all at once can be far less costly than removing a single system, or even removing them one at a time. For instance, if I removed survival, food, plants, creatures, combat, and inventory all in one swoop, the upfront cost, which would be high, would be offset by all the patching up I don't need to do between all the removed systems. In other words, fact number one boils down to, if you're battling complexity, you need to be using a chainsaw, not a scalpel. That leads me to fact number two. Fact number two is that taking a chainsaw to the feature set might fix the complexity issue, but it can't change the fact that most of those features intersect directly with Kickstarter rewards, add-ons, stretch goals, etc. It doesn't matter that most of those elements aren't core gameplay, and it doesn't matter that removing them might fix the unmanageable complexity. What matters is that these are the features that attracted most of you to the project in the first place. That's an even bigger problem, and that's what I'm going to be exploring next. Okay, now I'm going to say a bunch of stuff that could easily freak everybody out. So, I'm counting on you to hear me out and listen closely, especially to the conditionals. You've all shown me a lot of trust, even when I'm, making sort of controversial moves like branching off into AlphaWave in order to support Frontiers. I think if all I said was, we need to cut stuff, a lot of you would support me without asking more questions. But you're probably in the mindset that I was in till recently, where the idea of cutting certain things just isn't in the realm of possibility. So before you offer me that support, let me get real specific. We're going to imagine a hypothetical world where Frontiers the game exists, but Frontiers the Kickstarter campaign never happened. In this world, I'm still facing the exact same problems with Frontiers. It's monolithic and unmanageably complex and needs to be cut down, but I don't even have to think about what happens if I start cutting certain features. Everything could be cut, and we're going to look at what I would cut in that situation and what the game might look like afterwards. Remember, this is all hypothetical at the moment, so don't freak out. Okay, first let's take a hard look at the core gameplay in Frontiers. Let's ask ourselves what pieces are really working, and I don't just mean what pieces do we like or not like. I like nearly everything in the game, and I can imagine a version of the game where every piece that's in there gets finished and balanced and plays an important role in the game. But I'm talking about identifying the parts that are working right now, not what might work someday if only I had more time. That list looks something like this, and as you can see, it's short. First and foremost, the setting is working. We put a lot of work into the world and the lore, and I think it shows. It may not have the insane depth you'll find in other similar games, but it's weird, and it's unique, and it's basically everything that I want in a fictional game world. So I wouldn't cut a thing there. Next is the story, and by extension the mission and dialogue systems, which is our primary means of expressing the story. These are the most robust and functional parts of the game. The missions themselves are wonderful, in my opinion, and mix adventure and interpersonal struggles really nicely. And the dialogue is very deep, with hundreds upon hundreds of branches, and effective, and highly extendable, if occasionally kludgy, scripting system that ties into the world. Again, I wouldn't cut a thing here. I wouldn't cut any dialogue. I wouldn't cut any features from the dialogue. It all works. Next is mission-related resource management and survival. What do I mean by this? Well, there are a lot of opportunities for resource gathering and management in the game, but because they're still so unbalanced and unfinished, they're just not much fun. The exception is when these elements tie directly into the story. For instance, when you have to raise a ransom for a friend, or you need to gather supplies for a specific journey. In those instances, resource management comes alive, and I actually care about the stakes, and the success or failure of my actions are clear. So I would keep those specific elements. There are only a handful, and basically cut the rest. Locations. Okay, what I mean by this is location names and backstory and visual design. The regions, the terrain, the plant life, the structures, all of these largely work for me, and I would keep the majority of them. The exception would be any locations that are not started yet or have no chance of being finished in the near future. Music is self-explanatory, it's wonderful. The characters are an extension of the story, so I would leave them largely untouched. Finally, the reputation system, which pairs up nicely with the conversation system. Currently, it's hard to notice what it's doing because there's so much clutter in the game, but it plays an important role in revealing or hiding conversation options, and this would become much more apparent after the fat was cut away. So I'm sure you've noticed the theme here. Every element, with the exception of music, ties directly into either the setting or the story. And in a fully functional, well-balanced version of Frontiers, every element would tie into the story somehow, but in the game as it exists now, only a few elements have really made it that far. Some notable omissions from this list include the path creation system and fast travel system. Despite the fact that the premise of this game is built around those elements, they haven't clicked yet. I would hate to see them go, but that's how it would have to be. A general survival system, combat and weapons, the skill system, that all of these things also don't make the grade. There are parts of these systems that I love, and I poured my heart into making them work, but the rule is that if it's not core and if it's not working right now, then I would have to cut it. So what does that leave us with? I mean, not a lot, not as much as we started with, but not nothing either. There's good material in there. There's enough to assemble a quality game. The only question is, what the hell kind of game is this going to be? How would these elements be implemented in this cut down version? And this is where I really got stuck for a while, trying to imagine what I would do with this handful of pieces. All I could picture was a pretty but mostly empty wasteland with literally nothing to do in the vast spaces between speaking to characters. That's when it hit me. We just cut the vast spaces. We can cut anything, right? That's the whole point of this thought experiment, is that we're just free to cut anything. Cut the vast spaces. We're so used to thinking about Frontiers as an open world RPG with survival elements, but that was before we cut all the things that justify having an open world, like resource gathering and survival and crafting and path creation, fast travel, and so on. Cut the open world and this problem goes away. In fact, I would go one step further. I would cut an entire dimension of space out of the game. Make Frontiers a two-dimensional game and suddenly it all clicks. We're looking at the components of a visual novel. I warned you, but once you go that far, everything falls into place. The laid-back gameplay would translate well into this kind of storytelling. The conversations can make the transition without alteration. The character designs, if not the actual character models, would survive as well. There'd be no shortage of material for rendered backdrops. I have a nearly completed open world and tons and tons of scenery and locations. So if this project had been created on my own, without your support during the campaign, without your participation in helping me create all the add-ons and features and develop the gameplay and all of that, if none of that had happened, and it was just me by myself, that's how far I would go in cutting the game down. It would hurt. It would hurt a lot to lose that much work and that much time, but if it meant the difference between a forever buggy open world RPG and a potentially exemplary visual novel, I would be willing to go that far. But of course that's not what happened. The game exists largely because of you, and not just because you paid money. We created a lot of these features together. We collaborated. Some of your serious business features changed the main storyline. This is a communal project. It doesn't belong just to me. Stripping Frontiers down to a visual novel would be the biggest bait and switch in Kickstarter history.